Muffins are not supposed to look like that, she muttered, jabbing the tray with a potholder. The tops were charred black, like tiny volcanoes caught mid-eruption. She winced at the smell, burnt sugar and shame, and hauled the tray onto the counter. Duke barked from the hallway. Once, twice. A warning, not panic, but with just enough edge to make her nerves jangle. "Hold on, buddy," she called, voice tight. "We're all doing our best this morning." The phone rang, sharp and insistent, right as the front bell dinged with cheerful obliviousness. Cynthia grabbed the receiver with her clean hand and mashed it against her ear, while fanning the smoke with the other. "Willow Creek Inn, this is Cynthia," she said, trying for calm, but landing closer to breathless. A woman on the other end launched into a high-speed inquiry about room availability, breakfast hours, and whether the festival traffic had started clogging Main Street yet. Cynthia shifted the phone to her shoulder. "Yes, you'll still be able to check in by 2, she said, nudging open the kitchen window to clear the air. "And yes, the turkey trot is still on schedule for tomorrow morning, rain or shine. Though I think we're leaning toward shine." Outside, the late November sun slanted over the porch roof, catching the frost still clinging to the windowsills. The last of the golden leaves swirled across the sidewalk. And in the driveway, a man in a brown jacket wrestled with a clipboard and a lopsided stack of boxes, right before Duke launched himself against the front door, barking like the apocalypse had arrived. "Hang on, please," Cynthia said, slamming the phone down gently, by current standards, and rushing to the door. She yanked it open, pulling Duke back by his collar just as the delivery man gave her a startled half-smile. "You Harper?" he asked, shifting the topmost box under his arm. "That's me. Festival drop-off. I've got 3 more of these in the truck. Hope you like centerpieces." "I was told 2 boxes." The man gave a shrug that said not my problem, and turned back toward the van. Cynthia sighed and held the door for him as Duke leaned heavily against her leg, tail thumping but eyes locked on the stranger. "You're supposed to bark after they break in, not before," she muttered into his fur. Duke woofed in reply, clearly satisfied with his contribution. The bell above the front desk jingled again. Early guests, of course. Cynthia pasted on her best, not panicking at all smile, and stepped into the foyer, just as Maggie swept through the side entrance with a tray of coffee cups and a stack of folded flyers tucked under her arm. "I come bearing caffeine and small-town gossip," Maggie said, holding up the coffee like a peace offering. "Which do you need more?" "Both," Cynthia said. "But only if you're okay drinking coffee that smells vaguely like burnt blueberries." She didn't wait for a reply before taking a long sip. The weekend was only beginning, and already she could feel it unraveling, like a scarf caught in a breeze, threads tugging loose from all directions. Between the guests, the festival, and whatever Duke had sensed that she hadn't, the Thanksgiving weekend promised anything but rest. And something about it, something in the air, felt like more than just holiday chaos. The scent of scorched muffins lingered in the kitchen like an accusation as Cynthia opened every window she could reach. Frosty air rushed in, crisp and unforgiving, as though punishing her for not setting a second timer. "I swear, if one more thing goes sideways today," she muttered, reaching for the linen basket tucked beneath the sideboard. Duke trailed behind her as she moved from room to room, paws clicking softly on the hardwood floors. Upstairs, sunlight filtered through lace curtains and painted golden puddles on the patchwork quilts. Cynthia smoothed a crease from the edge of the comforter in room 2 and straightened the framed photo of autumn aspens above the headboard. Every room had its quirks. This one had a thermostat with commitment issues and a closet that creaked like it was narrating its own ghost story. But the guests didn't need to know that. Room 3 still whistled whenever the wind came in from the north, and Room 4's antique bed squeaked like an old violin. But they were charming flaws. At least that's how she planned to describe them if anyone asked. She fluffed a pillow, checked the soap dish, and paused at the window. Outside, the sidewalk bustled with early arrivals in down vests and knit hats, coffee cups in hand, weaving between hay bales and bundled cornstalks lining the square. The turkey trot banners flapped in the breeze, and she could just make out the faint sound of a fiddle warming up from the performance stage 2 blocks over. Downstairs again, she restocked the cookie jar and added fresh cider packets to the guest drink station. Her "Welcome Trotters" sign still sat at a crooked angle. She reached out to straighten it, then stopped mid-gesture as the front bell jingled again. The new couple standing in the foyer beamed at her. "Early check-in, okay?" the woman asked. "We couldn't resist coming into town a little sooner. Everything looks so festive." Cynthia smiled, ignoring the small inner screen that reminded her the couple's room still needed towels. "Of course," she said. "Let me grab your key." While her newly installed video system was for recent scares and break-ins, it was proving very helpful with the inn's upkeep. As she retrieved it, she caught a glimpse of herself in the entryway mirror. Cheeks flushed, hair frizzing at the temples, one cuff stained with blueberry batter. Not quite the picture of polished hospitality. But as she handed over the key and welcomed the guests up the stairs, the woman turned back with a cheerful laugh. "This place is adorable, like walking into a Hallmark movie." Cynthia blinked, surprised. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. Then she turned back toward the kitchen and whispered under her breath, "Now if I can just keep it from turning into a true crime documentary." Maggie reappeared in the kitchen just as Cynthia finished wiping flour from the countertop for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. Her best friend carried a smug smile and a folded newspaper like she was about to deliver the day's most delicious scandal. "I was going to offer to help with the cider packets," Maggie said, setting the paper down. "But something tells me what you need more is 5 uninterrupted minutes of political gossip." Cynthia glanced up from the tea towels. "Only if it's juicy." "Oh, it's dripping." Maggie pulled out a stool and sat, crossing her legs with practice flair. "So, you know how the sheriff's election has been simmering under the surface? Brantley just turned up the heat." Cynthia poured herself the last of the good coffee. "He's been working the room every time I go into town. Flashing that politician's smile like it owes him money." "Well, rumor is," Maggie said, tapping the newspaper for effect, "his campaign hosted a private volunteer thank you brunch yesterday. Except Dolores Hastings swears she saw them handing out $50 gift cards to everyone who walked through the door. Volunteers or not." Cynthia nearly choked on her coffee. "You're kidding." "Wish I were. Granger's campaign hasn't said a word, but word on the street is he's livid. You know how he is, quiet type, but that eye twitch of his gives everything away." Cynthia set down her mug. "It's a small-town election. How are we already in bribe territory?" "Because Brantley doesn't know how to run a clean race," Maggie said flatly. "He knows how to charm, how to shake hands, how to spin a story. But Granger? Granger's actually doing the job. I mean, as acting sheriff, he really cleaned this place up. People respect him, he's honest, he's helped us out more than a few times, and that makes him dangerous to someone like Brantley." Cynthia leaned against the counter, folding her arms. "And Lisa Cowell? Still Granger's campaign treasurer?" Maggie's eyes sparkled. "Oh, now there's a powder keg. Lisa's been stomping in and out of town hall like she's about to drop a bombshell. Sarah Wilkes swears Lisa has proof someone's been misreporting campaign donations." Cynthia raised an eyebrow. Sarah Wilkes was a tough woman. Her niece, Lily, has been accused of manslaughter over the summer, and with her only niece in custody, she was trying to keep the family Wilkie name strong. Someone like? No one knows. Lisa plays her cards tighter than Fort Knox. But when Dolores cornered her yesterday at the cafe and asked point blank, Lisa said, and I quote, "The town deserves better, and I intend to deliver it." Cynthia let out a low whistle. That woman is about as cuddly as a porcupine in a snowstorm, but she doesn't bluff. Exactly, Maggie said. And if she's planning to go public, we're about to have front row seats to a real scandal. Just in time for the turkey trot. Cynthia stared out the kitchen window, where campaign flyers flapped on lampposts like uneasy flags. I was hoping for a peaceful weekend. Maggie sipped her coffee. In Willow Creek? During an election? Good luck with that. Town Hall smelled faintly of old wood polish and overbrewed coffee, a combination Cynthia had come to associate with long meetings and longer egos. The main chamber buzzed with voices as the turkey trot planning committee gathered, clipboards in hand, tension practically hanging from the crown molding. Cynthia slid into her usual seat near the back, flanked by a stack of festival handouts and her own notes for the harvest market setup. She hadn't planned to attend, but Maggie had given her a look that said, "You'll want to see this unfold in real time," and Cynthia's curiosity had done the rest. At the front of the room, Millie Foster, chair of the committee and unofficial guardian of all things clipboard related, cleared her throat and tapped a pencil on the table. Let's come to order, folks. We've got a tight agenda today, so let's stay focused. Councilman David Tran scoffed. Focused? Half the vendor booths haven't been assigned, and we're still short on volunteers. This whole thing is a disaster waiting to happen. Then maybe you'd like to volunteer, Lisa Cowell said smoothly, from her seat beside Millie. She didn't look up from the binder on her lap. Or is complaining your only contribution this year? The room collectively tensed. Lisa, as always, was dressed like she was moments away from testifying before Congress. Navy blazer, no-nonsense bun, pen dangling from a chain like a warning. Her reputation as a perfectionist wasn't exaggerated. She was sharp, efficient, and, as Maggie liked to say, about as warm as a granite countertop in January. Let's keep things civil, Millie said quickly. We're all here because we care about the festival. I care about transparency, Lisa said, still not looking up. Which is why I'd like to revisit the vendor sponsorship budget. Oh, not this again, Dolores Hastings groaned from across the room, dramatically setting down her crocheting. You're going to accuse someone of fraud again, aren't you? Lisa raised her head then, eyes locking on Dolores with all the warmth of a frost-bitten windshield. Not yet. That silenced the room. Cynthia shifted in her seat, watching as Sarah Wilkes tapped nervously on her tablet, and Millie glanced between the women like a schoolteacher unsure whether to intervene. I just think, Lisa said, rising slowly, that before we assign booths and finalize our press statements, we make sure our house is in order. Misused funds, ghost sponsors, vendor forms that don't match donation logs. That's not festival planning, it's laundering. Councilman Tran slammed a hand on the table. You better be careful, Cowell. I'm being precise, Lisa said. There's a difference. Millie stood, her voice strained. Okay, let's table that until after the race logistics. The overhead lights flickered. Once, then again. A nervous murmur rippled through the room as the fluorescent bulbs stuttered, dimmed, then returned to full glow. No one said anything for several seconds. Then Lisa sat down again as calmly as she'd stood. I'll circulate a summary before noon, she said, turning a page in her binder. You'll want to read it. Lisa Cowell didn't seem to notice, or care, that every person in the room was now watching her, like she'd just unsheathed a dagger. She returned to her notes, flipping pages in her binder with exacting precision, her fingernails clipped short and painted a practical nude. Everything about her, from the crisp lines of her blazer to the way she tucked her pen neatly into its slot, radiated control. Calculated, unbothered. It wasn't arrogance. Not exactly. While Cynthia had not known Lisa for too long, it was long enough to know that Lisa didn't need to win people over to do her job. She just needed to be right. And in her mind, she usually was. She doesn't bluff, Maggie had said more than once. She just drops bombs. And judging by the tension thickening the air in the room, Lisa had another one ticking quietly beneath that binder. She's good, Sarah Wilkes whispered nearby, her tone low, wary. Too good, you never see her coming until you're already under the bus. Cynthia glanced her way, arching an eyebrow. She has enemies? Plenty, but fewer than she used to. Sarah leaned in. Some people disappear from committees after crossing her, some just stop showing up. Lisa stood again, this time without preamble. Since we're delaying the booth assignments, I'll speak plainly. David Tran visibly tensed. Dolores clutched her crochet bag like it might shield her from whatever was coming next. Vendor booths were promised to donors at the platinum tier, Lisa said, flipping a paper around and tapping it twice with her pen. Yet we have 2 booths currently assigned to names that don't appear on the donor ledger. She paused, letting that sink in. I believe at least one of them is a shell, used to redirect funds inappropriately. And yes, she added, meeting Tran's gaze, I can prove it. Are you accusing me again? He said, voice rising. Lisa gave the faintest of smiles. If the evidence fits. Cynthia's eyes moved slowly across the room. No one defended him. No one defended her either. Lisa wasn't liked. But in this moment, she was holding all the cards, and no one dared knock them from her hand. Lisa didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. I'm formally accusing Councilman David Tran of misappropriating campaign funds through the Turkey Trot Booth program. Silence dropped like a brick. A pencil rolled off someone's clipboard and hit the floor with a soft click that sounded absurdly loud. Cynthia blinked, unsure she'd heard right. But the look on Lisa's face, unflinching, resolute, left no room for doubt. She wasn't just speculating. She wasn't suggesting. She was naming names. Tran's expression darkened. This is outrageous. You can't just stand there and... I can, Lisa said, her voice steady. And I will. The financial records show 2 donations from shell vendors, routed through a local payday, both connected to your brother-in-law's business. You didn't expect anyone to cross-check booth assignments against donation confirmations. But I did. Murmurs rippled through the room like the first gust of wind before a storm. Millie's face had gone pale, her clipboard sagging slightly in her hand. Sarah stared at Lisa like she was watching a building crumble in slow motion. Even Dolores Hastings, normally thrilled by chaos, looked too stunned to speak. Do you have any proof? Tran demanded, his voice brittle. You'll have copies by the end of the day, Lisa replied. I'd advise you to start preparing a response. The tension in the room hit a breaking point. Then, almost as if the building itself couldn't take the pressure, the lights flickered. Once, then again, longer this time. The overhead fluorescents buzzed as the room dimmed and briefly dropped into shadow. Gasps, a few startled whispers. Someone's phone chimed with a weather alert. No one checked. Cynthia's heart ticked up, the hairs on her arms rising. The lights blinked back on. Lisa, still standing at the center of the storm, closed her folder with a quiet, decisive snap. "Now if we're done here," she said, "I have work to do." She didn't wait for permission or reaction. She simply turned and walked out of the room, heels clicking crisply against the linoleum. The door shut behind her with a soft but final thunk. For a moment, no one breathed. Cynthia looked around the room. What had just happened wasn't politics. It wasn't even drama. It was a declaration of war. And someone in that room wasn't going to let Lisa win. 2. Parade and panic. The morning air was brisk enough to nip at Cynthia's fingers, even through her gloves, but it carried the sweet, earthy scent of pine and spice that made her forgive the chill. She tugged the last corner of the autumn bunting into place across the B&B's wraparound porch and stepped back to admire her work. "Not bad," she murmured to Duke, who lay at the top of the porch steps, tail flopped over his paws, watching the world with the quiet attentiveness of a dog who took his sentry duties seriously. Almost festive enough to distract people from last night's political explosion. Duke flicked an ear, unimpressed. The red and gold garland fluttered in the breeze, framing the hand-painted chalkboard sign she'd propped by the door. "Welcome Turkey Trotters. Warm cider inside." Below the sign, a basket of cinnamon-scented pine cones rested beside a vintage milk crate filled with rolled-up trail maps and festival programs tied with orange ribbon. Cynthia had spent the better part of the morning wrestling them into place, all while trying not to think too hard about Lisa Cowell, Councilman Tran, or the accusation that had left Town Hall in stunned silence. Around her, Willow Creek was waking up in full holiday bloom. Strings of miniature pumpkins and corn husks lined every fence post. Harvest banners draped from lampposts. A trio of kids ran past on the sidewalk, faces painted like turkeys, shrieking with laughter as they dodged an enormous inflatable cranberry can being slowly inflated in front of Town Hall. From somewhere down the block, the high school marching band was warming up with a wobbly rendition of Yankee Doodle, followed by scattered applause from early festival goers staking out parade watching real estate. The Turkey Trot Festival had officially begun. Cynthia tightened the scarf around her neck and gave the porch one last once-over. The wreath on the door had a pine cone missing. She'd fix that later. Maybe. A pair of her guests, Mr. and Mrs. Weldon, retirees from Colorado Springs, stepped onto the porch with paper cups in hand and cheerful smiles on their wind-chapped faces. "It's a postcard out here," Mr. Weldon said, pausing beside the rocking chair. "You've done a lovely job, Miss Harper." "Thank you," Cynthia said, meaning it. "It's our first time attending the Turkey Trot," Mrs. Weldon added. "Though I admit, we're more excited about the pie contest than the actual run." "I don't blame you," Cynthia said. "There's a record number of entries this year, and from what I hear, some of the bakers have been perfecting their recipes since August." "Well," Mr. Weldon said, adjusting his scarf, "after we grab a seat for the parade, we're planning to swing by the Harvest Market. I hear they're selling hand-carved turkey figurines. For the mantle." "Sounds like you've got your day mapped out," Cynthia said with a smile. As the Weldons headed off, Cynthia turned back toward the house. Duke had risen to his feet, nose twitching, attention fixed across the street. "Something catch your eye?" she asked. Duke didn't move. His ears were up, body still, gaze locked on the Wilkes property, 2 doors down. The front yard was decorated with modest hay bales and a straw scarecrow in a blue flannel shirt. Nothing out of the ordinary. Except Duke clearly didn't think so. He let out a low woof. Cynthia walked to the edge of the porch, squinting into the light. A folded piece of paper sat crumpled near the base of the Wilkes mailbox. Wayne must have carried it there. But as she stepped off the porch and crossed the sidewalk, a strange feeling came over her. Goosebumps, maybe from the cold, or maybe something else. She scooped up the paper and smoothed it open. The handwriting was rushed, bold. You think you're safe because it's small town quiet. You're not. Cynthia's pulse skipped. Where did this come from? She murmured. She glanced up and down the street, but no one was nearby. Just a few vendors chatting beside crates of pumpkins, and Dolores Hastings setting up her nonpartisan pamphlet stand near the corner. Duke nosed her side, whined softly. Cynthia folded the paper again, slower this time. A prank? Maybe? A dramatic, ill-advised joke? Possibly. Or not. She slipped the note into her coat pocket and ran a gloved hand down Duke's head. Good eyes, partner. They turned back toward the inn, but Cynthia couldn't shake the feeling that someone had wanted that message to be found, and that whoever wrote it wasn't joking. The scent of kettle corn drifted on the breeze as Cynthia followed Duke down the sidewalk, her hand brushing the note still tucked in her pocket. The festival crowd had thickened as families wandered with hot cider. Vendors arranged jars of preserves under striped tents, and campaign banners flapped lazily from porch rails and storefronts. But despite the festive colors and laughter in the air, the unease in Cynthia's gut hadn't faded. Duke tugged at his leash with unusual insistence as they approached the edge of the square, heading in the direction of the Cowell residence. Cynthia frowned. Lisa's small bungalow sat on the corner just past the florist, with its neatly trimmed shrubs and stone walkway that looked as unyielding as its owner. Duke, she said quietly, we're not delivering muffins. She'd call the health department. But Duke had already veered onto the edge of Lisa's front yard, nose low, tail stiff. He paused near the hedge that bordered the sidewalk, gave a low huff, then began pawing gently at something half buried in the grass. Cynthia crouched down beside him. Nestled in the damp blades was a crumpled flyer, one of the many plastered around town promoting the turkey trot and harvest market. But someone had scrawled across it in thick black marker. Back down or it's your turn next. Her breath caught. This wasn't the same handwriting from the note Duke had led her to earlier. This one was shakier, messier. But the message was clear. And it was directed at Lisa. She stood slowly, glancing around. No one seemed to be paying them any attention. A group of teenagers walked by, laughing and tossing popcorn at each other. Across the street, the mayor was shaking hands near a booth draped in red, white, and gold bunting. Normal festival chaos. But here, just feet from Lisa's porch, someone had dropped a threat like a stone into still water. Duke looked up at her, waiting. Cynthia folded the flyer carefully and tucked it beside the first note in her coat. Should she take it to Granger? Or would that only stir the pot? He had enough on his plate with the election, but despite politics, he was still the town's sheriff. Still, Lisa had made herself a target last night. And now, someone wanted to make sure she knew it. Acting Sheriff Luke Granger stood near the edge of the festival green, his hands tucked into the pockets of his sheriff's jacket, eyes scanning the growing crowd, like he expected someone to leap from behind a hay bale with bad intentions. He nodded a greeting as Cynthia approached, Duke trotting obediently at her side. Busy morning, Cynthia said casually. He gave a small, tired smile. Busier than I'd like. Festivals bring out the best and worst in people. Turnout looks strong, though, she said, glancing around. For both the harvest market and the election. Granger nodded. We've had a steady stream at early voting. Good for democracy. Bad for my blood pressure. Cynthia hesitated. Everything okay? Just a lot of noise, he said, his voice low. Half the calls I've gotten this morning are about lawn sign thefts and suspicious looks between rival campaigners. Suspicious looks? She repeated. I know, he said with a short exhale. That's where we are. Before she could decide whether to mention the threatening flyers, a wave of laughter erupted nearby. Cynthia turned and spotted Carter Brantley across the square, standing beside a cider booth with a small crowd gathered around him. He looked polished as always, peacoat draped just so, hair a touch too perfect for the blustery weather. He handed a campaign button to a woman who blushed, then bent to shake a toddler's hand like he was kissing babies for a movie role. Cynthia watched him lean in to say something to a couple of tourists, who laughed far too loudly. Then he caught sight of her and offered a gleaming photo-op-ready smile. She gave a polite nod, nothing more. Charm's easy, Granger muttered beside her. Integrity takes work. Hard to print that on a brochure, Cynthia said under her breath. Granger's expression didn't shift, but something in his posture tightened. He wasn't rattled easily. But today, even his stillness had a frayed edge. Keep an eye out, he said quietly. There's more going on than what's on the surface. Cynthia's hand drifted toward her coat pocket, where the notes still rested. She had a feeling he was right. Mayor Bill Morton stood behind a long folding table draped in an American flag cloth, shaking hands like a man going through the motions. His smile didn't reach his eyes, and even from across the square, Cynthia could tell he was distracted. She approached slowly, Duke trotting alongside her with the calm patience of a dog who knew how to blend into a crowd. "Mayor," she greeted. He looked up with a jolt, as though he hadn't seen her coming. "Ms. Harper," he said, forcing a quick smile. "Happy Festival Day." "Indeed," she said, noting the sheen of sweat at his hairline despite the brisk weather. "Nice turnout this morning." "Record-setting, I'm told," he said, adjusting the sleeves of his blazer. "Lots of enthusiasm this year. Good for the town. Good for community spirit." Cynthia nodded, letting the silence hang for a beat too long. The mayor shifted uncomfortably, eyes flicking toward the clipboard in his hand. She caught a glimpse of the festival logistics sheet he'd been reviewing. A roster of booth assignments, volunteer schedules, and printed halfway down the page in blocky black text. Lisa Cowell, vendor coordination and security briefing notes. His jaw clenched. "You working the festival yourself?" Cynthia asked lightly, though she kept her eyes on his. "Just keeping things running," he said quickly. "You know how these events go. Keep smiling, keep shaking hands, keep the cider hot, and the tempers cool." "I imagine you've had to manage a few of those already," she said, tilting her head. He paused. "There's always noise before an election." His tone was meant to sound offhand, but Cynthia noticed the way he folded the clipboard, so Lisa's name was hidden from view. She also noticed how he didn't meet her gaze after that. "I'll let you get back to it," she said, stepping away. "Looks like Brantley's gathering another crowd." The mayor gave a dry chuckle, but it lacked conviction. Cynthia walked away slowly, the feeling creeping in again that something was out of place. Grigsby had always been a little formal, but never this tense. And definitely not the kind of man who fidgeted with paperwork in the middle of a cider booth. Duke brushed gently against her leg as they moved on. "I saw it too," she whispered. Cynthia's road took her toward the east side of the festival green, where booths for local nonprofits and campaign stations were set up in a loosely defined horseshoe. She paused near the voter registration tent, eyeing the flyers taped to the side, reminders of polling hours, early voting instructions, a cheerful cartoon turkey urging citizens to make their voices heard. Beside the booth, a young woman in a campaign button-down jacket leaned against a folding chair, arms crossed, a clipboard tucked tightly under one elbow. Her strawberry blonde ponytail bounced with every nervous glance she cast toward the Wilkes Building, where a banner for Granger's campaign fluttered in the wind. "You okay?" Cynthia asked gently, slowing as Duke sat down beside her. The woman blinked, startled, then offered a tired smile. "Hi, sorry, just trying not to get dragged into the drama tornado." Cynthia offered a light laugh. "Festival season or campaign season?" "Both," the woman said, shifting her weight. "I'm only volunteering part-time, but even that's too much lately." Cynthia angled toward her, hands in her coat pockets. "Rough week?" The woman's shoulders sagged. "You didn't hear it from me, but everyone on Lisa Cowell's team is walking on eggshells. After last night, people are freaked. No one knows what she's going to do next." Cynthia's brows lifted. "I heard she made some bold claims." "She's got files," the woman said in a whisper. "Spreadsheets, receipts, probably secret recordings for all I know. But the way she's handling it, she's not exactly gentle. Lisa never has been." "Yeah, well, that's the problem. She's made a lot of enemies, even on her own side. Everyone's afraid to say anything now, afraid to even ask questions." There was genuine anxiety in her voice, enough that Cynthia made a mental note of her name tag. "Kayla, volunteer coordinator." Cynthia gave a small nod. "Thanks, Kayla. Stay warm." As she walked away, Duke bumped her knee with his nose. Cynthia glanced down and offered a scratch behind his ears, her mind already whirring. Everyone was afraid to talk. That usually meant someone had something to hide, or that someone had already been threatened not to dig any deeper. The aroma of roasting nuts and spiced cider mingled in the crisp air as Cynthia made her way past a row of festival booths. Hand-painted signs advertised everything from homemade preserves to artisanal dog treats, which Duke paused to sniff with practiced enthusiasm. She let him linger while she browsed a table of maple syrup bottles shaped like little pine trees. Across the table, Saul Garvey was busy arranging his newest batch of pumpkin butter jars into an arch he claimed resembled the Rocky Mountains. He wore his usual flannel shirt and leather apron, the sleeves dusted with sugar and cinnamon. Saul had been running the Willow Creek pantry booth at the festival for over a decade, and he had a reputation for hearing things. Not sharing them, but hearing them. Which made his next words all the more notable. "You didn't hear this from me," he said without looking up. "But Lisa was planning something big." Cynthia arched a brow. "Define big." Saul gave one last pat to his syrup display and leaned in just slightly. "She asked me 3 days ago if I had any old invoices from last year's vendor list. Said she needed them to confirm some discrepancies." Cynthia kept her expression neutral. "Discrepancies?" "She didn't explain," Saul said, voice low. "But she looked like someone on a mission. The kind of mission that ends with a resignation or a lawsuit. That's comforting." He finally looked up, eyes narrowing. Whatever she was digging into, it wasn't for fun. And I don't think she cared who she made uncomfortable in the process. Cynthia gave a slow nod. "Any idea if she found what she was looking for?" "Not from me," Saul said, turning his attention back to a sticky jar lid. "But when someone like Lisa starts chasing a trail, she usually doesn't stop halfway." Cynthia slipped a jar of syrup into her basket and paid without another word, though her thoughts were anything but quiet. Lisa had clearly stirred something up. Now the question was, had she stirred it too much? Duke brushed against her calf as they turned to leave, and she realized she'd tensed without knowing it. "Let's hope she's planning to share whatever she found," Cynthia murmured. But even as she said it, a knot formed in her stomach. Because people who stirred too much trouble in Willow Creek didn't always get the chance to share. The town square's main stage sat beneath a canopy of orange and gold streamers, flanked by straw bales and pumpkins stacked like sentinels. A modest crowd had gathered for what the printed schedule called a midday meet and greet with campaign treasurers, an event designed to spotlight the candidates' financial transparency and give voters a chance to ask questions before the weekend wrapped up. Cynthia stood near the back of the gathering crowd, Duke at her side, trying not to look like she was there for anything more than curiosity. The microphone crackled to life as Millie Foster stepped up to the podium, smiling brightly despite the faint strain around her eyes. "Thank you all for joining us this afternoon," she said into the mic, voice a little too cheerful. "We're so pleased to welcome representatives from both campaigns." Cynthia's gaze swept the platform. Carter Brantley was already there, of course. Perfect posture, tan coat draped casually over his arm, sleeves rolled just enough to show off expensive cufflinks that seemed out of place next to a hay bale. He grinned as he shook hands with an elderly couple in matching turkey hats, leaning in to listen like they were the only people in the world. Luke Granger stood to one side of the stage, his expression unreadable, one hand resting on his belt near his badge. He nodded politely to those who approached, but he kept checking his watch, twice in as many minutes. A narrow folding table had been set up between them, with 2 name placards and stacks of pre-printed budget summaries. Only one of those placards had someone standing behind it. Millie cleared her throat and glanced off stage, her smile faltering. "We're still waiting on Lisa Cowell, treasurer for Sheriff Granger's campaign. I'm told she's running just a bit behind." Cynthia's brows drew together. Granger's mouth had tightened. Brantley looked unconcerned. Too unconcerned. Millie continued, covering for the gap with a vague comment about town pride and civic duty, but Cynthia wasn't listening anymore. Her focus had shifted to the second folding chair, conspicuously empty. The stack of handouts behind Lisa's name remained untouched. No coffee cup, no binder, no Lisa. Duke gave a soft whine. Something was wrong. Lisa Cowell wasn't the type to skip anything, let alone a public-facing event that involved facts, figures, and a podium. Cynthia felt it like a stone dropping in her gut. 3. Found in the field. Cynthia stood near the start line of the Willow Creek Turkey Trot 5K, tugging her knit hat a little lower against the early morning chill. The November sun had barely crested the pine-studded ridge to the east, casting long shadows across the frost-silvered grass. The festival field buzzed with a strange pre-race mix of adrenaline and cinnamon. Somewhere behind her, a brass band stumbled through a rehearsal of Stars and Stripes Forever, the trumpets sharp and sleepy. Duke stood at her side, golden fur haloed in mist, tail flicking with contained energy. He'd been unusually alert since dawn, pacing the B&B foyer before she'd even started the coffee pot. Now his ears twitched with every new sound, nose raised, scenting the air like something was off. "You're not even racing," she muttered, glancing down at him. "Save some excitement for the pie contest." He didn't react. Instead, his focus was fixed across the open field, where rows of corn stalks rustled just beyond the festival tents. The makeshift corn maze, constructed from leftover husks, hay bales, and optimism, was meant to entertain kids after the race. At the moment, it looked oddly still. Cynthia scanned the crowd. Joggers stretched near the sidelines, some in turkey hats, some in head-to-toe lycra. Children weaved through folding tables, chasing each other with cider donuts in hand. Volunteers handed out numbered bibs and water bottles while Sheriff Granger, wearing his uniform but no campaign pin, spoke with a security staffer near the parking lot. Carter Brantley wasn't far from the main tent either, laughing a little too loud as he greeted a cluster of supporters. Cynthia caught only a few words: unity, community, momentum. But the cadence was rehearsed. Controlled. Duke gave a sharp bark. Cynthia's gaze snapped to him just as he bolted. "Duke!" But he was already halfway across the field, galloping past the cider booth, dodging a startled jogger, and heading straight for the maze entrance. "Duke, wait!" Cynthia took off after him, breath catching in the cold air, her boots slipping on frosty grass. He disappeared into the maze. Something in her chest twisted. It wasn't like him to ignore her twice. Not unless it was important. Cynthia pushed through the narrow maze entrance, stalks scratching against her coat as she followed the sound of Duke's barking. Her breath puffed in front of her in sharp bursts, the cold clinging to her throat as she jogged the uneven path between corn and hay bales. "Duke?" she called, voice tight. "Where are you?" No answer, just the rustle of dried husks and the flutter of festival banners whipping in the wind overhead. She rounded a bend, heart racing now, pulse hammering against her collarbone. Then she saw him. Duke stood motionless near the far edge of the maze, nose low, tail stiff. He let out a low whine as she approached, ears twitching but otherwise still as stone. "Duke?" she said again, slowing. "What is it?" And then she saw her. Lisa Cowell lay sprawled in the shadow of a wooden scarecrow, her body half concealed behind a wall of hay bales. One arm bent awkwardly beneath her. Her coat was dusted with bits of straw, hair unpinned, one shoe missing. Cynthia froze. For a moment, her brain refused to register what she was seeing. It tried to turn it into something else, an accident, a display, a morbid Halloween leftover that hadn't been packed away yet. But the moment stretched too long, too quiet, and something inside her dropped. She moved forward slowly, almost against her will. Lisa's face was turned away, her dark hair tangled in the hay. Her gloved fingers curled toward the ground like they'd been reaching for something. "Lisa?" Cynthia whispered. No response. She crouched beside her, heart pounding. There was no movement, no breath, just the stillness of something far too final. The chill from the ground seeped into Cynthia's knees as she hovered, afraid to touch, but needing to know. Duke let out another low whine, his body pressed protectively beside Lisa's still form. "Okay," Cynthia said shakily, fumbling for her phone. Okay, we'll get help." She backed away and turned toward the exit, her hands trembling as she dialed the sheriff's office. And all the while, the scarecrow loomed behind her, flannel sleeves fluttering in the wind like it was waving goodbye. Cynthia moved a few steps away from the body, her phone pressed tightly to her ear, fingers numb from more than just the cold. The moment she heard the dispatcher's voice, her words came out in a rush. "It's Cynthia Harper. There's a woman, Lisa Cowell. She's not moving. She's in the corn maze near the festival field. I think she's dead." The dispatcher's voice was calm but urgent. "Stay on the line, Ms. Harper. Help is on the way. Are you in any immediate danger?" Cynthia shook her head, even though no one could see her. No, but someone. Something. This isn't an accident." Duke gave another soft whimper. Cynthia turned back. He had lowered himself beside Lisa, chin resting near her outstretched hand, the tip of his nose brushing the wool of her glove. His body language wasn't alert anymore. It was mournful. Still, guarded. Cynthia swallowed hard, eyes burning. "I'll stay on the line," the dispatcher said, but Cynthia barely heard her. She stepped back toward the body, breath catching. There was something disturbingly peaceful about the scene, if you didn't look too closely. Lisa's expression was slack, not panicked, her eyes closed. But the unnatural angle of her shoulder and the way her legs were twisted behind her told the truth. This was no feint, no fall. Cynthia's gaze flicked up, toward the scarecrow looming behind the hay bales. It stood sentry, dressed in a faded campaign t-shirt and a floppy straw hat. One of its arms had drooped, revealing a sharpened wooden pole jutting from its sleeve. She hadn't noticed it before. Now she couldn't unsee it. Cynthia's stomach churned. That wasn't just a prop. It was the murder weapon. She took another step back, nausea crawling into her throat as the weight of the moment hit her all at once. This wasn't just the discovery of a body. This was the unraveling of everything. Duke shifted closer to Lisa, nudging her hand gently with his nose again, as if he still believed she might stir. Cynthia looked away. For the first time since arriving in Willow Creek, she wasn't sure she was ready to know the truth. By the time Granger arrived, Cynthia had already moved to the edge of the maze, arms wrapped tightly around herself, trying to ward off the chill that had little to do with the weather. Duke sat beside her, quiet now, though his ears remained high, alert. Granger ducked under the festival banner strung across the maze entrance, flanked by two deputies who looked like they'd been plucked straight from the cider booth, mid-break. His boots crunched over the frost-stiff grass as he approached, expression grim. "Where is she?" he asked. Cynthia didn't speak. She just raised her arm and pointed. Granger followed the path without hesitation, his jacket brushing against the cornstalks as he disappeared around the corner. One deputy stayed with Cynthia while the other trailed behind him, radio in hand. It wasn't long before she heard him swear, low but sharp enough to cut through the still air. She closed her eyes. Moments later, Granger returned, jaw tight, his face pale beneath his tan. "She's gone," he said quietly. "No pulse. Rigor hasn't set in yet." Cynthia nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Granger turned to his deputy. "Seal off this entire area. I want a barrier around the maze and the adjacent field. No one else in or out until we've swept every inch." "Yes, sir," the deputy said, already raising his radio. Cynthia glanced toward the festival crowd beyond the maze. The sounds of laughter and brass band music still carried on the wind, oblivious. The race hadn't even started. People were still sipping cider and lining up for pastries, while Lisa Cowell lay in the shadow of a scarecrow, her final moments hidden from view. Granger followed her gaze. "We'll keep this quiet for now," he said. "No announcements, not until we've secured the scene and I've spoken to her family." Cynthia nodded again. It was Duke who found her. Granger's eyes dropped to the retriever, who sat solemnly beside her like a sentry. "Good dog," he said softly. Then, looking up again, "Did you touch anything?" "No," Cynthia said. "Just called it in." He looked relieved. "Thank you. We'll need your full statement." "Of course." He hesitated, then added, "And Cynthia?" She met his gaze. "I have a feeling this isn't just about the campaign anymore." Cynthia gave a short nod, but her gaze was already drifting toward the edge of the field. Beyond the maze's boundary, just past the strip of caution tape, two deputies had hastily strung between hay bales. A small crowd had begun to form. It wasn't intentional, just festival goers who'd wandered too close and hadn't yet been told to move along. A few parents clutched children's hands a little tighter. Others stood murmuring behind gloved hands or into phones, their cheerful turkey trot buzz replaced with confusion, even fear. She spotted Dolores Hastings among them, her arms folded tightly across her plaid poncho as she leaned in close to Helen Gwenda from the flower shop. Cynthia couldn't hear what they were saying, but Dolores's expression was as serious as she'd ever seen it. Not gossipy, wary. Is someone hurt? I think someone fainted. Was it Lisa? I haven't seen her all morning. Snippets of conversation floated toward her, fractured and uneasy. Duke shifted at her side, ears up again, his body tense, not from threat, but from something heavier. Awareness. Like he understood what they were all sensing, even if the words hadn't caught up. Cynthia knelt to place a steadying hand on his back. You did good, she murmured. We'll let the grown-ups ruin things from here. A child's voice piped up somewhere behind her. Is the race cancelled? Another voice answered, half-whispered. It was that woman, Lisa. She made enemies. Cynthia turned, scanning the small knots of people. She didn't see who said it, but the words lodged in her chest like splinters. She stood again, her breath frosting in front of her. It was amazing and disturbing how fast rumors moved in a town this small. But this time, the fear felt real. Not just festival nerves or election drama. This was different. This was grief trying to form shape. She looked back toward the corn maze, where the scarecrow's crooked silhouette still loomed behind the tape. It looked like nothing more than part of the decor. Its campaign t-shirt faded, its flannel sleeves fluttering in the wind. But now Cynthia saw it differently. Whoever had done this hadn't just killed Lisa, they'd made a statement. She turned toward the sound of approaching boots, just as Granger returned, something wrapped in plastic, held carefully in one gloved hand. One look at his face, and she knew. The next truth was going to be worse than the last. While deputies began placing caution tape around the maze's perimeter and gently redirecting curious festival goers, Granger ducked back into the scene for a second time, this time with latex gloves and a narrowed gaze. Cynthia remained where she was, her back to the crowd, trying to keep Duke calm with one hand in his fur while her thoughts spiraled. When Granger returned, he was holding something in one hand, carefully wrapped in the corner of a plastic evidence bag. His face had gone even paler. He crouched beside Cynthia, lowering his voice so no one else would hear. You're not going to believe this. She didn't want to. What? He unwrapped the item just enough for her to see. It was a wooden stake, roughly the width of a yardstick, splintered at the bottom, the top sharpened to a ragged point. A faint smear of dried blood marked the edge. Then she saw the peeling sticker still clinging to one side. A campaign slogan, red and white ink. Brantley for sheriff. Integrity, strength, change. Cynthia blinked. You've got to be kidding. It was hidden inside the scarecrow's sleeve, Granger said. Tied to the frame like it was part of the arm. Whoever did this planned it ahead of time. Used a sign as the murder weapon, she said softly, still staring at it. He nodded grimly. Symbolic, maybe, or convenient. She shook her head. Either way, that's not just a message, it's a statement. Granger wrapped the stake back up, rising. I don't want this getting out yet, not until I've had a chance to speak with Brantley. You think he? I think we don't jump to conclusions, he cut in, though the edge in his voice was unmistakable. But he's going to have to answer for how one of his signs ended up covered in blood and stuffed into a murder scene. Cynthia swallowed, her stomach lurching. The cheerful chatter of the turkey trot crowd echoed in the background, oblivious to the rot festering just beneath the surface. Duke stood again, pressing into her side. The festival was officially underway, and Lisa Cowell was officially dead. 4. Everyone's a suspect. The kettle squealed on the B&B stove, but Cynthia didn't move to take it off the heat right away. She stood by the window instead, arms folded tightly over her chest, watching the cold morning fog dissolve over the town square. Below, turkey trot booths had already been draped in caution tape. Just yesterday, they'd been stringing bunting and testing speaker mics for the turkey trot. Now the air was thick with dread, and half the town knew there'd been a body. "Do you think she planned it?" Maggie's voice broke the silence from across the kitchen table. "Lisa, I mean, that whole outburst at the town hall. Do you think she wanted to go public with the fraud all along?" Cynthia turned and blinked as if waking from a dream. She crossed the kitchen and poured the water into 2 mugs before sliding one in front of Maggie. The steam rose between them, but neither reached for it. "She didn't strike me as impulsive," Cynthia said slowly. "Cold, yes, methodical even, but not the kind of woman who'd blow something like that without a reason." Maggie nodded. "I just keep thinking about how sharp she looked that day. Not like usual, hair done, blazer pressed. She stood there like she wanted to be seen." "She did want to be seen," Cynthia murmured, sinking into the seat across from her. "Which means she knew what she was risking. She must have felt safe enough to do it." Cynthia shook her head. "Or desperate enough." They sat in silence, the sounds of the B&B creaking and Duke's gentle snoring under the table, the only things grounding them. Cynthia's mind spun back to the meeting. The tension in that room had been razor thin even before Lisa spoke. Dolores snapping at Councilman Tran. Sarah Wilkes tapping her pen like she wanted to drive it through the table. The mayor's vacant stare. Brantley oozing charm from the back row, while Lisa stepped forward like she had a knife in her purse and knew exactly where to aim it. "She had to have had proof," Cynthia said. "You don't accuse a public official of fraud during a campaign season unless you're holding something real." "Unless she was bluffing." "No." Cynthia tapped her fingers against her mug. "She had something. The question is, did someone kill her because of it?" Maggie's silence answered for her. Later that morning, Cynthia zipped her coat and followed Evan across the frost-streaked edge of the field. The last of the festival bunting fluttered limply from hay bale posts, casting long shadows across the churned-up ground. Granger's deputies had already cleared most of the scene. Tape gone, path trampled, the area sanitized for morning joggers and nosy pedestrians alike. But Evan had asked her to come back before too many others disturbed the dirt. "Here," he said, crouching near the place where the hay bales had once formed a crude border around the scarecrow display. "Look at this." Cynthia joined him, squinting down at the soft earth. Amid the chaotic mess of footprints and broken grass, 2 tire impressions curved in opposite directions. One of them had a clean tread, deep symmetrical lines, likely from a standard pickup or SUV. But the other looked off. The pattern was jagged, almost faded in places, like the tire was worn down or balding. Not a match. "You think they belong to 2 different vehicles?" she asked. Evan shook his head. "Same vehicle. One tire's just wrong. Look how the spacing shifts here, like the wheel alignment's off. That's not a townie's truck." "You're sure?" He gave her a look. "I fixed half the vehicles in Willow Creek, Sin. If this were someone local, I'd probably recognize the tracks. Or at least the tire style." Cynthia crouched beside him, brushing a few stray leaves from the pattern. "Could it be a rental? Something from out of town?" Maybe, or someone passing through who didn't want to be remembered. She followed the faint trail with her eyes. It veered toward the gravel access road behind the field, back the way delivery vans often came in. Hidden from the main path, private. It would have been easy to sneak in under cover of darkness, do what they came to do, and drive off before sunrise. It's like they didn't expect anyone to look this closely, Cynthia said softly. They didn't count on Duke, Evan said, glancing at the golden retriever snoozing near the picnic table a few yards away. Or you. A gust of wind rattled the drying stalks in the corn maze behind them. Cynthia stood slowly, brushing dirt from her jeans. Her breath caught on the breeze. Whoever they were, she said, they left a mark. We just have to figure out what else they touched. Cynthia hadn't meant to linger inside the Willow Creek Town Hall. She'd only dropped in to leave a fresh stack of turkey trot flyers on the community bulletin board. But as she crossed the marble-tiled foyer, voices echoed faintly from the records room down the hall, too low to be part of the usual bureaucratic drone. She hesitated, steps slowing as she passed the council chambers. One voice was sharp and clipped, almost scolding. The other, tense, controlled, like it was trying not to crack. "You said she wasn't supposed to go public," snapped the first voice, clearly Dolores Hastings, her tone unmistakably venomous. "I didn't think she would," came the reply, softer but unmistakably Councilman Tran. "Lisa said she'd handle it discreetly." There was a pause, shuffling paper, maybe the scrape of a chair, and then Dolores hissed, "Well, she didn't. And now she's dead." Cynthia froze mid-step, her hand hovering over the community board's pin. Tran's voice dropped. "We don't know that her outburst and her death are connected." Dolores laughed, sharp and bitter. "Don't play naive with me. If this gets out, we're all done. Every one of us." A thud followed, perhaps a folder slammed shut. Cynthia backed up a step, suddenly aware of how loud her own breathing sounded in the hallway. She glanced toward the records door, but couldn't risk being seen. "Keep your head down," Tran said, voice lower now. "We have to let the investigation run its course. No more whispers, no more damage control." Cynthia eased back around the corner just as footsteps clicked toward the door. She pivoted quickly, pretended to be inspecting the fire evacuation map on the wall, heart pounding as the door creaked open. Dolores passed first, shoulders rigid, hair sprayed into defiance. Tran followed, eyes flicking toward Cynthia with brief recognition. He offered a curt nod, professional but guarded. Neither said a word. Once they were out of sight, Cynthia let out the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She stepped forward and pinned the flyers to the board with shaky fingers. A dozen questions danced behind her eyes. What exactly had Lisa known that tied both Dolores and Tran into knots? And what were they so desperate to keep buried? She'd walked in expecting to hang flyers. Instead, she'd uncovered two more suspects with something to hide. Cynthia found Sarah Wilkes in the Willow Griddle's back pantry, arms deep in a crate of powdered sugar. "Don't sneak up on me unless you want flour in your hair," Sarah warned without turning around. Cynthia smirked. "You're already dusted like a donut." Sarah huffed and straightened, brushing white powder from her apron. "Festival prep, remember? I've got 6 pies cooling, 3 more in the oven, and my assistant called in with a sore throat. More like a sore boyfriend." "I won't keep you long," Cynthia said. "I was hoping you could tell me a bit more about Lisa." Sarah's smile dimmed. She wiped her hands on her apron, suddenly hesitant. "I didn't know her well." "But you worked together on the planning committee. And you said something yesterday about Lisa having something on someone." Sarah looked toward the swinging kitchen doors, then back at Cynthia. "Yeah, she called it her insurance file, Said if anyone tried to throw her under the bus, they'd regret it. Sarah thought for a moment about all her years with Edith, and the secrets of the town hidden, but decided not to say anything more to upset Cynthia. She trusted and admired Cynthia, and wanted nothing more than to maintain that trust. Cynthia helped ensure that her niece Lily would be cleared, and she had only been helpful to the town since she arrived. Did she say what was in it? She was cagey. All I know is, she mentioned campaign finances and some kind of pattern she'd uncovered. Said it would ruin more than one person's career if it ever came out. Cynthia's stomach gave a quiet lurch. Did she ever mention where she kept it? No, Sarah hesitated. But she was always locking that festival office drawer. The bottom one. Used to get snippy if anyone touched her desk. I just figured she was particular. Cynthia nodded slowly, her mind already shifting into gear. She knew Sarah knew the secrets of this town, as the Wilks were one of the town's founding families. Thanks, Sarah. That helps more than you know. Hey, just be careful, okay? Sarah stepped closer, voice low. I don't think Lisa died because of any festival drama, and if she was poking around in things she shouldn't have, you might want to think twice before following in her footsteps. Cynthia offered a faint smile. Thinking twice isn't really my thing. Sarah rolled her eyes. Yeah, I've noticed. Back out in the crisp November air, Cynthia zipped her coat and started toward the inn. If Lisa had kept something in that locked drawer, Cynthia needed to find a way into it before someone else did. Before it vanished. Because whatever Lisa had found, someone had already killed to keep it buried. And Cynthia had a growing suspicion the file might not only explain Lisa's death, but point directly to her killer. The sound of raised voices pulled Cynthia's attention as she stepped off Main Street onto the gravel path behind Town Hall. Just beyond the row of vendor tents, Acting Sheriff Luke Granger stood beneath the Turkey Trot banner, his expression tight as a trio of townspeople surrounded him. You said the parade grounds were secure, one man barked, arms crossed, campaign sticker still half torn on his jacket. They were, Granger replied evenly. But we had over 200 people there. Vendors, volunteers, visiting families. That's not an excuse, a woman cut in. A woman was murdered. At a family event. Cynthia paused just behind the cider booth, hidden from view but able to hear every word. Granger didn't flinch. And I take that seriously. We're reviewing footage, conducting interviews, and the coroner's report is underway. It's not good enough, the man snapped. People are scared, Sheriff. If you can't guarantee our safety. Granger raised a hand, firm but calm. I understand, and I'll earn back that trust. The crowd dispersed in a simmer of muttered frustration. Granger exhaled, shoulders dropping ever so slightly, then turned to head toward the voter registration booth. As he disappeared into the crowd, Cynthia spotted a campaign volunteer nervously shifting from foot to foot near the pie stand. She recognized the young woman, Riley, she thought, usually glued to Lisa Cowell's side with a clipboard and a perfectly rehearsed smile. But today, Riley looked pale and jumpy, eyes darting toward anyone who passed too close. Riley? Cynthia approached gently, keeping her tone casual. The young woman startled. Oh, Miss Harper! Hi. Are you okay? Riley gave a stiff nod. Just, long day, lot of emotions. Cynthia hesitated, then asked, Did Lisa seem worried last time you saw her? Riley bit her lip, glanced over her shoulder. She was always intense, but the last week? Different, focused. She kept saying she was close to cracking something. Something big. Cynthia's pulse picked up. Did she say what? She said people would panic if they knew, that she wasn't afraid to take the heat. Riley leaned in, voice a whisper. But maybe she should have been. Because ever since, people are scared. I think Lisa stirred up something dangerous. Cynthia didn't doubt that for a second. What scared her more was that whatever Lisa stirred up, it hadn't settled yet. A The secret file. Cynthia waited until the festival office was mostly cleared out. By late afternoon, the tent flaps had been drawn closed, and only a few volunteers lingered, organizing leftover signage and empty cider crates. She slipped in quietly, nodding to a teenager boxing up unused flyers near the entrance. "Just need to grab something from the desk," she said, projecting casual confidence. The kid didn't question it. Lisa's desk still sat at the far end of the tent, a folding table now half buried beneath clipboards, misplaced buttons, and donation envelopes. Cynthia moved quickly but methodically, sliding the loose papers aside until she spotted the bottom drawer, still locked. She crouched, fingers brushing the handle, and remembered Sarah's words. Lisa was always protective of this drawer. A quick glance around confirmed no one was watching. Cynthia reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a slim hairpin she kept for emergencies, usually lost keys or jammed mailboxes, not amateur sleuthing. Her hands were steady as she worked the lock, each quiet click making her heart beat faster. A soft pop. The drawer slid open. Inside, tucked beneath a roll of masking tape and a stray campaign sticker, was a manila folder labeled, "For My Eyes Only." Cynthia exhaled and lifted it carefully. The folder was heavier than expected, filled with paper-clipped pages, post-it notes, and a small USB drive in a zip-top bag. She opened the top flap and scanned the contents. Names, dates, donation totals. A few spreadsheets with columns labeled "discrepancy" and "redirected." Cynthia's pulse quickened. This wasn't just bookkeeping. It was a breadcrumb trail. And if she was reading the notes correctly, it didn't implicate just one campaign. It suggested both Brantley's and Granger's camps had financial irregularities. Payments that didn't match public records, donor names that didn't exist. Tucked into the back was a half-finished letter, scrawled in Lisa's sharp handwriting. "If anything happens to me, check the transfer logs, the ones under apostrophes.c. I'm not imagining this. People are getting paid to look the other way." Cynthia's throat tightened. She tucked the folder into her tote bag and gently slid the drawer shut. As she stepped back into the bright chill of late afternoon, Duke trotted up beside her with a soft bark, tail wagging. Cynthia glanced around the square, the scent of roasted chestnuts and kettle corn still lingering in the air. Lisa hadn't been paranoid. She'd been right. Cynthia didn't head straight home. Instead, she took the long route around the square, circling past the festively lit vendor booths and turning down a quieter side street lined with campaign signs. She spotted Carter Brantley's white SUV parked beside the pop-up headquarters his team had set up in the old bakery space. The windows were aglow, revealing volunteers packing up banners and boxes. Through the glass, Brantley stood at the center like a maestro, directing traffic with a clap on the back here, a reassuring handshake there. Ever the showman. Cynthia paused at the door, debating. Then she pushed it open. The bell overhead jingled, drawing Brantley's gaze. His bright smile dimmed slightly when he saw her, but he smoothed it over fast. "Miss Harper," he said, stepping toward her. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Coffee? A cookie? You look like you've had a day." "I need to speak with you," Cynthia said, her tone cool. He raised an eyebrow and nodded toward a corner near the front, where a folding table sat between two space heaters. "Let's chat." Once seated, Cynthia pulled the manila folder from her tote and placed it between them. Brantley stared at it. That mine? Lisa's, she replied. Hidden in her locked drawer. That wiped the smile off his face. She opened the folder and slid out a few highlighted pages. These are transfers from donors who don't seem to exist. And some very creative bookkeeping on both your campaign and Granger's. Brantley reached for the papers, but she held them steady. This is just a copy. Originals stay with me. He sighed and sat back, arms crossing. Look, I won't pretend I know what Lisa was doing in her off hours. But if she's compiled that much, she either stumbled on a mistake or someone planted this to ruin me. Planted? Think about it, he said. I'm neck and neck with Granger in the polls. Someone leaks this. Suddenly I'm the corrupt one, and he's the local hero. Cynthia studied him. Lisa mentioned apostrophes. C. Apostrophe. Anyone come to mind? Brantley looked genuinely puzzled. No clue, but if you're chasing shadows, I'd start in Granger's camp. They've got more reason to be scared right now. He leaned in slightly. Whatever that folder is, I didn't authorize anything shady, but someone wanted it found. As Cynthia left the building, the folder tucked safely away again, she wasn't sure what unsettled her more. Brantley's indignation, or how convincing it sounded. The wind had picked up by the time Cynthia reached the B&B. Dry leaves skittered along the sidewalk like startled mice, and Duke trotted a few paces ahead, ears twitching with each rustle. Inside, warmth greeted them, the scent of cinnamon from a simmering potpourri on the stove, the gentle hum of the radiator pipes doing their best against the creeping November chill. Duke shook off at the door and flopped into his bed with a satisfied grunt. Cynthia hung her coat, kicked off her boots, and padded into the kitchen. She set the manila folder on the table, its corners slightly worn now from being handled, and stared at it for a long moment. Lisa had collected all of this while planning a festival, managing a tense campaign, and fielding small-town politics. How, and more importantly, why hadn't she gone to the authorities? Because she hadn't trusted them. That much was becoming clear. Cynthia opened a cabinet, pulled down a mug, and started a pot of chamomile tea. The quiet of the house settled around her shoulders like a blanket, and still, the tension didn't lift. What was she doing? She'd moved to Willow Creek to slow down, to trade PR meetings and corporate agendas for waffles and guest reservations. She hadn't anticipated murder, let alone political fraud. And yet here she was, again, faced with secrets, threats, and people who didn't want the truth dragged into the light. She thought of the last meeting she'd sat through at her Manhattan firm. Flashing slides, fake laughter, forced smiles. The way her boss had smiled when he said she was too passionate for long-term leadership. Like caring was a liability. Cynthia closed her eyes. The stakes had felt different then. Bigger, maybe, but they hadn't been. Not really. Lisa Cowell was dead. Murdered. And whoever had silenced her might still be walking around the square smiling, shaking hands, posing for festival photos. That wasn't something Cynthia could ignore, not anymore. She poured the tea, let it steep, then carried the cup to the dining room window. Outside, across the square, Brantley's headquarters was still lit. A figure stood in the window, tall, hands on hips, watching. Cynthia stepped back from the glass instinctively. Was she being paranoid? Or just finally paying attention? A soft creak on the stairs made her jump. But it was just Duke, sleepy-eyed and stretching as he padded toward her, tail thumping lazily. Cynthia looked down at him, and her lips lifted slightly. "You'd let me know if I was in real danger, wouldn't you?" she murmured. Duke blinked up at her, then let out a soft huff and rested his head on her foot. She wasn't sure what came next, but she knew she couldn't walk away, not now. Not when Lisa had tried so hard to leave a trail for someone to follow. The next morning dawned brittle and overcast, the kind of gray that made every corner of Willow Creek feel sharper. Cynthia didn't sleep much. Every creak of the old house kept her half awake, her mind replaying conversations with Brantley and her own uneasy reflection from the night before. She'd just finished preparing a breakfast tray for the early risers, a cinnamon apple Dutch baby, and scrambled eggs with rosemary, when she heard the front bell chime. Maggie stood there in a pale green parka, her red curls pulled into a bun, her cheeks ruddy from the cold. She held a bag from the maple griddle in one hand, and her knit scarf was still half unwound as she stepped inside. "Before you say anything," Maggie said, handing her the bag, "these are for you. Maple scones, fresh." "You didn't have to." "I did," Maggie cut in, "because I know that look." Cynthia set the tray down and gestured toward the kitchen. "Coffee?" "Always." They sat at the small table by the window, while Duke stretched out underfoot, tail thumping once before settling into a nap. Maggie watched Cynthia take a sip. "You've got that storm is coming. Look again." "What happened?" Cynthia hesitated, then gave her the condensed version, finding Lisa's file, confronting Brantley, feeling the invisible line between curiosity and danger inching closer every day. Maggie didn't interrupt. She just listened, brow furrowing deeper with every detail. "I'm not saying you should stop," she said when Cynthia finally paused. "But I think you need to be more careful." Cynthia arched a brow. "You think someone's watching me?" "I know someone is," Maggie said, leaning in. "I overheard two people whispering outside the griddle last night. One said, 'She's sticking her nose in again,' and the other said, 'If she finds out what Lisa knew, it's over.'" Cynthia felt a chill crawl down her spine. "Could have been about anyone," she said, not even convincing herself. Maggie snorted softly. "This is Willow Creek, Cyn. How many people are sticking their noses into campaign finances and cold cornfield corpses right now?" Cynthia gave her a tired smile. "Fair point." "I'm not trying to scare you," Maggie said. "I just don't want you blindsided. Lisa was smart, organized, a control freak, and she still ended up dead." That landed like a stone in Cynthia's chest. She looked down at her mug, watching the swirl of coffee and cream settle into a quiet spiral. "I don't want to live scared." "Then don't," Maggie said. "Just live smart." Outside, the wind picked up again, sending a swirl of leaves skating across the porch. Inside, the two women sat in quiet agreement, neither willing to walk away, but both aware of how high the stakes had become. Cynthia didn't realize she'd fallen asleep until the snap of a floorboard jolted her upright. She sat in the dark of her bedroom, heart pounding, every nerve standing at attention. The bedside clock glowed 2:13 a.m. Another noise, this time a softer creak, came from downstairs. Duke, usually dead to the world by this hour, let out a quiet growl from his bed in the corner. "Stay," she whispered, though her voice trembled. She slid out from under the quilt, every movement deliberate. The house, old as it was, made noise all the time, but this was different. Focused, purposeful. Barefoot, Cynthia eased her way to the top of the stairs and paused, listening. No voices, no footsteps now, just the faintest rustle from the kitchen. Like someone shifting paper or opening a drawer. Her heart thudded in her ears. She turned back to grab her phone. Dead. Of course. She hadn't plugged it in before bed. Swallowing hard, She reached for the baseball bat she kept by the stairwell closet. Evan had insisted on it after the last break-in attempt. She joked at the time, but now her grip tightened around the worn handle, like it was the only steady thing left in the house. Step by step, she crept downstairs, careful to skip the third riser, always the creakiest. The kitchen light was off, but moonlight pooled through the window above the sink, casting a silver sheen across the countertops. Nothing moved. She edged forward, each breath shallow and quiet. Then she saw it. One of the drawers by the fridge stood half open. A chair was pushed out from the table, askew. On the floor, a smudge, white powder. Flour? Cynthia reached for the light switch and flicked it on. A breath caught in her throat. Scrawled across the counter in floury white streaks, someone had written, "Dropite." The letters were crooked, shaky, as if done quickly, but the message was clear. Cynthia's hand clenched around the bat. Her pulse roared. The back door lock was still engaged. So was the window above the sink. Whoever had done this had come and gone without tripping a single alarm. She backed out slowly, flipped the lights off, and returned to the stairwell. Her hands shook as she replaced the bat and finally allowed Duke to trail her back to her room, where she locked the door behind them. Only once she was under the covers again, with Duke curled protectively at her feet, did she realize the message wasn't just meant to scare her. It was a warning and a threat. Someone knew she was getting close. 6. A warning in the flower. The sunlight slanting through the curtains did nothing to warm Cynthia as she rolled out of bed the next morning. Her body ached with the hollow weight of sleeplessness, her mind still reeling from the message in flower. "Okay, Duke," she whispered as his paws danced near the door. I know. Breakfast time." He barked once, short and sharp, then galloped toward the stairs like his tail was on fire. Cynthia followed, not bothering with a robe. She felt too exposed already. As soon as she reached the bottom landing, Duke skidded to a halt in front of the kitchen door, nose pressed to the seam, ears alert. He growled, a low, rumbling warning. Cynthia stopped cold. The house was quiet, too quiet. No early risers milling in the parlor, no clinking of dishes from the dining room. Just the hollow thud of her own heartbeat and the thick memory of what she'd seen last night. "Easy," she murmured, pressing a palm to Duke's back. He twitched, but didn't budge. She pushed open the kitchen door. Nothing had changed. The chairs were still slightly out of place, one of the drawers left open like a careless whisper. And there it was again, scrawled across the butcher block counter in uneven, ghostly streaks of flour. Dropite. Seeing it again in the morning light was worse somehow. Less surreal, more surgical. Intentional. "Someone came in here," she whispered. Duke huffed, then trotted into the kitchen, sniffing along the baseboards and cabinet corners. Cynthia crossed to the back door and tested the lock, still secured. No signs of forced entry, no broken windows. But she hadn't imagined it. The message was real. Her pulse roared in her ears. It wasn't just a prank. It was calculated. Specific. Someone had entered her sanctuary not to steal, but to warn. Her stomach flipped. She grabbed a kitchen towel and began wiping the flour away with slow, deliberate motions. Each pass of the towel felt like erasing a piece of herself, like scrubbing out fear only to smear it deeper. She paused halfway through, staring at the fading imprint of the O in drop. Whoever had done this had known she'd see it. They'd counted on her checking the kitchen. They wanted her to know she was being watched. Her phone buzzed from the dining room table, startling her. She rushed to grab it. Evan. She let it ring once more before answering. Hey? You okay? His voice was groggy, still thick with sleep. Cynthia hesitated. Someone broke into the inn last night. That woke him up. What? I didn't see them. But they left a message. There was a pause on the other end. Then, I'm coming over. Evan, just stay there. Don't touch anything else. I'll be there in 10. The call ended before she could argue. Cynthia looked around the kitchen again. Too late for not touching anything. Too late for pretending she wasn't already deep in it. For a split second, Cynthia wondered if she'd pushed too far. If digging into Lisa's past, into campaign secrets, manifest forgeries, and orchard ledgers, had made her a target instead of a help. Maybe Duke was the only one who still trusted her. Back in the dining room, Cynthia slid her laptop across the table and opened the guest records. Duke had resumed his post near the kitchen, watching the front door with hawk-eyed vigilance, and Evan returned with a quiet all clear from upstairs before pulling up a chair beside her. Back windows are locked too, he said, pausing to glance toward the hallway. Nothing looks disturbed upstairs, but whoever did this knew where not to be seen. His jaw clenched. They were careful. Here's everyone who checked in yesterday and today, she said, scrolling through the list. 2 rooms with returning festival guests, 1 family from Denver, and these last 2, out-of-towners with a vague campaign staff, excuse for being here. Evan leaned closer. Names? Jeanette Doyle and Milo Cummings. Booked separately, but both for 2 nights. Milo checked in right after the volunteer rally yesterday. Said he was helping with Brantley's media team. She clicked into the reservation notes. Jeanette didn't say who she was with. Just local event coordination. Paid in cash, left a P.O. box for an address. That's not shady at all, Evan muttered, rubbing his jaw. Did you get a read on them? Cynthia thought back. Jeanette had that over-polished look, designer coat, phone glued to her hand, way too interested in where the printer was located. Milo was charming, but in a rehearsed sort of way. Smiled too much, smelled like too much cologne and confidence. Evan snorted. Campaign staff, all right. She pulled up the breakfast logs. Neither of them came down this morning, but I saw Milo step out around sunrise. Said he was going for a jog. Who jogs at sunrise in 40-degree weather? Someone covering tracks, maybe. They sat in silence for a beat. Cynthia's fingers hovered over the keyboard, her eyes scanning the notes she'd typed last night about Lisa's folder and the ledger pages. The closer she looked, the more the pieces resisted fitting neatly together. Jeanette's room is on the 2nd floor, Cynthia said. I walked past it earlier. Her door was closed, lights off. No do not disturb sign, though. Evan crossed his arms. I don't like the timing. Someone breaks in, leaves you a message, and 2 people with political connections just happen to be staying here? Cynthia didn't answer right away. Instead, she clicked open her old digital security folder, the one she hadn't touched since she left New York. Then she copied the guest list and started writing down plate numbers, room assignments, and timestamps from the check-in log. You're building a file, Evan said, quietly impressed. She looked up. If someone's going to threaten me in my own kitchen, the least I can do is return the favor, with bullet points. Cynthia was halfway through copying license plates from the guest log when the front door chimed again. Duke let out a single woof, alert but not alarmed, as Nina Marsh stepped inside, brushing a flurry of snow off her scarf. Do you have a minute? Nina asked, her voice low, her hands tucked into the pockets of her oversized peacoat. Of course, Cynthia said, gesturing toward the coffee station near the fireplace. Still have some fresh cinnamon blend left. Or decaf, if you're feeling reckless. Nina managed a half smile as she poured herself a cup. I just came from town hall. Figured you'd want to hear this. Cynthia's nerves sharpened like ice along her spine. Go on. The mayor and Lisa had a serious falling out last week. Loud enough that people in the hallway heard it through the door. Nina sipped, her gaze flicking toward the front window. It was about a campaign finance report, one that Lisa claimed went missing. She accused him of tampering with the records. Cynthia's heart kicked up a beat. Did she say what was in the report? No, just that it wasn't filed correctly and someone would pay. Her words, not mine. The mayor kept insisting it was an error, that it had been submitted, but Lisa wouldn't let it drop. Cynthia crossed her arms, trying to keep her voice steady. Do you know when this happened? Thursday morning, she stormed out after 20 minutes, didn't even glance at anyone on the way out. Nina leaned in slightly. But the mayor looked shaken, genuinely afraid. I've worked under 2 mayors, and neither flinched at confrontation like that. Cynthia filed the details away, mentally tagging the timeline. Thursday confrontation, Friday rally, Saturday death. That left only a slim window for whoever wanted Lisa silenced. You think he's involved? Nina asked, lowering her voice. I think he knows more than he said, Cynthia replied carefully. And Lisa clearly uncovered something dangerous, something that scared people. Cynthia's throat tightened. Lisa had tried to expose something, and ended up dead before she could. Was this what it looked like to get too close? Nina gave a grim nod. Well, if it's any help, I'll ask around. Discreetly. Thank you, Cynthia said, genuinely grateful. Just be careful. Things feel unstable right now. As Nina left, Cynthia turned to Duke, who'd resumed his silent watch by the hearth, ears tilted forward like satellite dishes. Looks like the mayor's mask is slipping, she murmured. And I don't think Lisa was bluffing. Duke let out a soft huff, as if he agreed. Cynthia waited until the inn had settled into mid-afternoon quiet, before opening the small utility cabinet beside the coat closet. Duke sat nearby, watching her with quiet interest as she tapped the old metal lockbox perched on the top shelf, her jury-rigged security backup system. It wasn't fancy, but it was functional. And after this morning's break-in, it was her best chance at answers. She brought the box to the front desk and hooked up the external drive to her laptop. A few blinking lights flared to life, and with a few clicks, she opened the video directory labeled Entry Cam, Kitchen Side. All right, she muttered. Let's see who decided to threaten me with pastry ingredients. The files loaded in sequence, time-stamped in tidy rows. Friday, normal foot traffic, Evan coming through the back with lumber. Saturday, vendors popping in with donation baskets. Sunday, quiet. Monday, quiet. Then, early this morning, 2:13 a.m., the file was gone. She blinked. No file. Just a gap. A missing timestamp where a clip should have been. She clicked around, refreshed the drive, ran a quick file integrity check. All signs pointed to deletion, not a system error. Great, she whispered. They knew what they were doing. Duke gave a soft whine, shifting closer. But, she murmured, clicking into the deeper subdirectory, you didn't know I set up redundancy. She found the secondary log, grainier, lower resolution, but untouched. And there, partially intact, was the ghost of a video from 2:12 a.m. Heart picking up pace, Cynthia hit play. The footage flickered, digitized snow creeping along the edges of the screen. She squinted, trying to make out the figure that slipped through the kitchen door. No face, just a silhouette, medium build, hooded sweatshirt, gloves. The person moved with purpose, not haste. They paused near the island, bent slightly, and then Cynthia leaned in. The figure traced something on the counter. With flour? It must have been. She fast-forwarded. The intruder stepped back, surveyed their message. Then, something small glinted in the light before the figure reached for it and pocketed it. A key? A flash drive? She couldn't tell. The video hiccuped and ended in static. Cynthia stared at the screen. They knew where the camera was, she murmured. They avoided the angle like a pro. This wasn't a prank, it was a warning. She copied the file to a separate drive and locked the original box again, adrenaline simmering just beneath her skin. Someone had broken into her inn, erased her footage, left a message in flour, and walked away unbothered. That wasn't just bold. That was calculated. And worst of all, it felt personal. Cynthia was halfway through her second replay of the corrupted clip when a strange detail caught her eye. She paused the footage and leaned in. The figure had moved back through the frame, almost out of view. But just before the video cut to static, the camera caught a sliver of profile. Not a clear face, not enough for an ID, but something. She adjusted the brightness and contrast, then zoomed in. Grainy, pixelated. But there was a familiar shape to the nose, the sharp jaw, the slight stoop of the shoulders. Her stomach tightened. It couldn't be. And yet, she'd seen that gait at the Turkey Trot rally. The same hand tremor at the cafe. And the same profile, tilted downward in the cold, trying not to be recognized. Her instinct screamed the name before her mind caught up. She hit play again. This time she focused not on the figure's actions, but on the gait. The hesitant step, like someone favoring an old injury. The subtle hand twitch when they reached into their coat. Cynthia froze. She'd seen that before. At the Maple Griddle 2 days ago. At Town Hall last week. The same gait, the same twitch, the same slight limp that came from slipping on ice last winter. Mayor Bill Morton. She sat back in her chair, eyes wide. The conclusion felt absurd, wild, even. The mayor? Sneaking into her kitchen in the dead of night to erase footage and scrawl warnings in baking ingredients? It didn't make sense. Except, it kind of did. He'd been quiet lately, distracted. And then there was that moment during the Turkey Trot planning meeting when his face paled at the mention of Lisa Cowell. And now Lisa was dead. Cynthia's fingers hovered over her phone. She wanted to call Granger, but what would she say? Hey, I think the mayor broke into my kitchen using powdered threats and poor lighting. The footage was circumstantial at best. It wasn't evidence, it was a hunch. But it was enough to send her blood humming with unease. She copied the frame and dropped it into a secure folder. Then she slid the backup drive into a zippered pouch and tucked it deep inside the hollowed-out book on her shelf. The one that used to hold her emergency chocolate stash. Sorry, Truffles, she muttered. Duke stirred at her feet, sensing her tension. Cynthia glanced toward the window. Outside, the trees swayed in the breeze. Harmless, picturesque. But the illusion of peace had officially cracked. If the mayor was involved, she wasn't just chasing political gossip anymore. She was neck-deep in something dangerous. This wasn't about nosiness anymore. This was about survival. And Cynthia had a creeping feeling that Lisa Cowell wasn't the last person someone wanted silenced. 7. Missing pieces. Cynthia waited until the afternoon sun had reached its golden hour before climbing the steps to Willow Creek's town hall. Duke padded beside her, silent but alert, tail swishing low in a slow, thoughtful rhythm. She'd debated leaving him at the B&B, but lately, it felt reckless to go anywhere alone, especially when suspicion swirled around someone with as much power as Mayor Bill Morton. The front office was quiet, save for the rhythmic tapping of keys and the occasional hum of the copier. Cynthia nodded politely at the receptionist and made her way toward the mayor's office, heels tapping in steady succession down the polished hallway. She didn't bother calling ahead. Bill Morton was standing behind his desk when she entered, his back turned to the window, framed by the golden haze outside. His gray suit jacket hung neatly on a coat hook, and the sleeves of his white shirt were rolled to the elbows. He turned at the sound of the door but didn't smile. "Ms. Harper," he said evenly. "This isn't a scheduled visit." "No, but I didn't think you'd mind." She closed the door behind her. "We need to talk." The mayor gestured to the seat across from his desk, but Cynthia remained standing. "I'm looking into Lisa Cowell's death," she said. His mouth pulled into a grim line. "As is Sheriff Granger, I've given him my full cooperation." "Then you won't mind answering a few questions," she replied, watching his eyes carefully. A pause. Then, "Go ahead. Where were you on Friday night, the night before Lisa's body was found?" He arched a brow. "At home. I had dinner with my wife. You can ask her." "And at any point did you visit the festival office or Lisa's workspace?" His jaw tightened, just enough for Cynthia to notice. "Not since Thursday," he said slowly. "Why?" "There's a partial security clip. It shows someone entering the building after hours. Their face isn't clear, but their build, posture, gait, it matches yours." He snorted. "That's circumstantial at best." "I didn't say it was you," Cynthia countered. "But you seem awfully quick to defend yourself." His tone cooled. "I'd suggest you tread carefully, Miss Harper. These are serious accusations." She didn't flinch. "So is murder." The mayor stared at her, silent for a long beat. Lisa was difficult. Smart but uncompromising. She made enemies on both sides. If she uncovered something, she didn't share it with me. Even after you argued about a missing campaign report. That got a flicker, just a breath of surprise before his face settled into neutrality. Office gossip. She accused a lot of people of a lot of things. If I got upset, it was because she was threatening the credibility of the election. Cynthia stepped back toward the door. "If that's true, then I'm sure you won't mind if I keep digging." The mayor didn't reply. But as Cynthia opened the door, she could feel his eyes burning into her back. Back at the inn, Cynthia found Maggie perched on a stool at the kitchen island, sipping tea and flipping through a well-worn folder labeled Festival Cleanup Logistics. Duke lay sprawled at her feet, half asleep, but with one ear twitching at every sound from the hallway. Cynthia dropped her purse onto the side table with a sigh and opened the fridge in search of anything resembling dinner. Leftover cranberry salad and a wedge of brie would have